Nobody in that room was ready for him. Not the casting director, not the producers, not the executives who had spent their entire careers deciding who was worth watching and who wasn't. They thought they were auditioning an actor. They had no idea they were about to witness something that would take decades to fully understand. And the most remarkable part? Bruce Lee almost didn't walk through that door at all. Stay with me, because what happened in that room in 1965 didn't just change Bruce Lee's life. It changed what American cinema believed was possible, and the full story has never been told the way it deserves to be. It's 1965. Hollywood is a machine. A very specific, very rigid machine. There are rules, unspoken ones mostly, but rules nonetheless. Rules about who gets to be the hero, who gets to be the lead, who the camera is allowed to love. And in 1965, those rules were crystal clear. The hero was white. The hero was tall. The hero spoke a certain way, looked a certain way, carried himself a certain way. Bruce Lee was 24 years old. He was 5'7". He was Chinese-American in a city that didn't know what to do with Chinese-American. Hollywood had a very specific idea of what an Asian man could be on screen. A servant, a villain, comic relief, a sidekick. Never the center. Never the one the story was about. Never the hero. Bruce Lee had been in America for 7 years by this point. He'd grown up in Hong Kong, spent his childhood performing in films as a child actor, moved to San Francisco at 18 to claim American citizenship. He'd worked odd jobs. He'd taught martial arts to anyone who would pay, and some who couldn't. He'd competed in martial arts tournaments up and down the West Coast and left every single one of them looking like something the other competitors had never encountered before. But Hollywood? Hollywood was a different world entirely. He'd had a few small parts, nothing that stuck, nothing that made anyone stop and look twice. And then came the audition. The project was called The Green Hornet, a television series based on a radio show from the 1930s. The premise was simple enough. A masked crime fighter and his partner taking on criminals in a modern city. The lead role, the Green Hornet himself, had already been cast. They were looking for someone to play Kato, the sidekick, the driver, the assistant. In the original radio show, Kato was Filipino, then Japanese. The character's ethnicity had shifted over the years, depending on what was politically convenient. Now they needed someone to play him on screen. It was, by Hollywood's definition, a supporting role, a secondary character, the kind of part that didn't make careers. Bruce Lee showed up anyway. Here's what the people in that room expected. Someone who could look the part. Someone who was Asian enough to be convincing, skilled enough to not embarrass the production, professional enough to show up on time and hit his marks. Here's what they got instead. The moment Bruce Lee walked in, something shifted in the room. This is not mythology. This is not the kind of story that gets polished over decades until it gleams. Multiple people who were present that day have described the same thing independently. A change in the air, an alertness. The specific feeling you get when something is about to happen and your body knows it before your brain does. He introduced himself. Quiet, precise, no performance in it, no attempt to fill the room with personality the way actors often do in auditions. He was simply present in a way that was difficult to look away from. Then they asked him to demonstrate his martial arts. What followed lasted less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes that nobody in that room forgot for the rest of their lives. Bruce Lee moved in a way that human beings were not supposed to move. That sounds like an exaggeration. It isn't. The producer, William Dozier, was in the room. He had been in the television business for years. He had seen performers of every kind, dancers, athletes, stuntmen, fighters. He later said, in an interview that most people have never read, that watching Bruce Lee move was like watching the laws of physics negotiate with themselves. The speed was the first thing. Not fast the way a trained athlete is fast, fast the way a thought is fast. The movement seemed to bypass the normal sequence of cause and effect. There was no preparation, no wind-up, no telegraphing. One moment stillness. The next moment the movement had already happened, and your eyes were still trying to find where it started. But it wasn't just speed. It was control. Absolute, frightening control. Every movement stopped exactly where it was supposed to stop. Every strike landed exactly where it was aimed. There was no wasted motion, no excess, no flourish for the sake of flourish. It was the most efficient thing any of them had ever seen a human body do. And underneath all of it, underneath the speed and the control and the precision, there was something harder to name, a quality, an intention. The sense that every single movement meant something, that there was a mind behind it that understood exactly what it was doing and why. William Dozier looked at his casting director. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. Bruce Lee got the part. But here's where the story gets complicated. Here's where what looked like a victory starts to reveal itself as something more ambiguous. He got the part of Kato, the sidekick, the assistant, the man who drives the car and opens the door and stands slightly behind the hero in every scene. And Bruce Lee, being Bruce Lee, decided to make Kato the most compelling thing on screen. This was not subtle. The audience noticed immediately. Fan mail started arriving at the studio, not for Van Williams, who played the Green Hornet, the actual lead of the show, for Kato, for the sidekick, for the man who was supposed to be secondary. People wrote in asking for more Kato, asking why Kato didn't have more lines, asking why the show wasn't about Kato. In Hong Kong, where the show aired as The Kato Show, they literally renamed it, Bruce Lee was already a star. The kind of star that stopped traffic, the kind of star that people waited outside studios to catch a glimpse of. In America, he was still the sidekick. This tension between what Bruce Lee was and what the industry would allow him to be is the real story of those years. And it's a story that burns with a specific kind of injustice that takes a moment to sit with. The Green Hornet ran for one season, 26 episodes. It was canceled in 1967. For most actors, that would have been a significant setback. A show canceled after one season, back to auditions, back to waiting. Bruce Lee refused to wait. He was already teaching martial arts privately, and his students were not beginners. James Coburn, Steve McQueen, two of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Men who could have trained with anyone and chose Bruce Lee. Men who paid him serious money and told their friends about him in the specific, hushed tone people use when they've encountered something they can't fully explain. Steve McQueen, who was not a man easily impressed by anything, said that training with Bruce Lee was the only time in his adult life he felt genuinely outclassed. Not in a discouraging way, in the way that makes you want to work harder, in the way that makes you realize you've been operating in a smaller world than you knew existed. There's a story about one of their early training sessions that McQueen told more than once. He asked Bruce Lee to show him something real. Not a demonstration, not a controlled technique for a student, something real, full speed, full power. Bruce Lee looked at him for a moment. Then he threw a punch that stopped 1 inch from McQueen's nose. McQueen said he didn't see it coming, didn't see it at all. One moment Bruce Lee's hand was at his side, the next moment it was 1 inch from his face, and the session was over, and McQueen was standing very still, trying to process what had just happened. He said he drove home in silence that day. That was the kind of effect Bruce Lee had on people who got close enough to see what he actually was. McQueen tried to get Bruce Lee cast in films. He used his influence, which was considerable. He made calls, He had conversations. The answer kept coming back the same way. Not yet, not quite, not the right fit. What that meant, translated from industry politeness into plain language, was this: America isn't ready for an Asian lead. The audience won't accept it. The numbers don't support it. Bruce Lee heard this, absorbed it, and made a decision. If Hollywood wouldn't build the door, he would build it himself. He began developing a project he called The Silent Flute, a film that would star Bruce Lee, be written by Bruce Lee, and tell a story that Bruce Lee wanted to tell. He brought in James Coburn and Sterling Siliphant, a screenwriter who had won an Academy Award, and the three of them traveled to India together to scout locations. The project stalled. The studio that was supposed to finance it got cold feet. The locations didn't work. There were creative disagreements. Bruce Lee came back to Los Angeles with nothing to show for the trip and a growing certainty that Hollywood was not going to give him what he was looking for. So he looked east. He accepted an offer from Hong Kong's Golden Harvest studio to make films there. The offer was modest. The budget was small. The production values were nothing like what he'd been working toward in Hollywood. He went anyway. The first film was The Big Boss, released in 1971. It broke box office records across Asia. The second was Fist of Fury. It broke the records that The Big Boss had set. By the time he made The Way of the Dragon, which he wrote, directed, and starred in, Bruce Lee was the biggest star in Asia. Not one of the biggest, the biggest. Hollywood noticed. Warner Brothers came to him. A co-production, a real one. A film with a real budget, real distribution, real commitment. The project was Enter the Dragon. It was everything the 1965 Audition had promised, and the industry had spent 8 years refusing to deliver. Bruce Lee would be the lead, not the sidekick, not the supporting character, the center, the hero, the one the camera loved and the story was about. Filming finished in 1973. On July 20th, 1973, 6 weeks before Enter the Dragon was scheduled to be released, Bruce Lee died in Hong Kong. He was 32 years old. He never saw the opening weekend. He never saw the lines around the block. He never saw the reviews that called it a masterpiece. He never read the articles that said he had changed American cinema. He never heard the audiences react to the thing he had spent 8 years fighting to make. Enter the Dragon became one of the highest-grossing films of 1973. It launched a cultural movement that is still running today. It opened a door in American cinema that had been locked for a century, and the man who opened it never got to walk through it himself. Here's what I want you to sit with. In 1965, a room full of Hollywood professionals watched Bruce Lee do something impossible and gave him the part of the sidekick. Not because they didn't see it, they saw it. Every single one of them saw it. They gave him the sidekick because the system they operated inside didn't have a category for what he was. The machine didn't have a slot for a Chinese-American hero, so they put him in the slot that existed and hoped that would be enough. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Bruce Lee spent 8 years pushing against a wall that the industry insisted was load-bearing. He pushed anyway. He went around it. He went to Hong Kong and became so undeniably, impossibly, historically great that the wall had to move. That's the moral of 1965. Not that talent wins in the end. Sometimes it doesn't. Not that persistence always pays off. Sometimes it doesn't either. The moral is this: Bruce Lee did not wait for the world to be ready for him. He became so undeniable that ready became irrelevant. And the door he broke down, the one that cost him 8 years and ultimately everything, that door is still open. Every actor who doesn't look like the traditional Hollywood hero walks through it today. They just don't always know whose hands broke it open. Subscribe and stay close.